this. Imagine if the price of everyday necessities were constantly inconsistent. Inflation is present in everyday life, such as gas prices or the price point of chicken per pound. Inflation, which is defined as sustained increase in the general price of goods and services in an economy over time, is necessary for generating employment and wage growth. Inflation, or price rise, has been a major concern for policymakers for a long time and affects everyone on a day-to-day basis. Inflation and the impact of money on the economy is an issue that can be addressed mostly through the government. Arguments have been made on this topic are often not addressed in the right way or lack all the necessary components to cover the concept completely. Today I would like to refute the approach of the main claim in the New York Times editorial, "Why is the Fed so scared of inflation?" This editorial argues primarily that inflation in the U.S. remains stagnant and low, and that government is not doing anything to change this, and they should. While this topic is relevant and important, I would like to argue that they did not go far enough with the point they were trying to make and did not supply enough evidence. There are plenty of examples included in this editorial that show how inflation affects us currently, but this editorial does not discuss or advocate for the main proven reasons we need inflation to be higher in the first place, and what effects stagnant inflation can have when it comes to not enough price increase. Inflation has been said to correlate with unemployment and employment rates as a whole. The article, "Why is the Fed so scared of inflation?" acknowledges that low unemployment usually has an impact on inflation, but only scratches the surface of why this is relevant to the argument of the growing need to address inflation issues. In an online article that discusses this, authors discuss in detail how labor market dynamics in the U.S. are changing due to long-term factors including decelerating labor force and the rising age of the labor force. They note that since 1995, the correlation between unemployment and inflation has remained generally the same. In light of this, the statistical research documents shared in this study discuss more clearly that unemployment is a factor that remains low despite stagnant inflation. This fact is relevant and important because it shows that unemployment is not the most accurate factor to consider when looking at the effects of low inflation, because there is a history of low unemployment and low inflation persisting side by side since the 1950s. This is information the New York Times article could have referred to in order to create a more accurate and stable stance. Secondly, the editorial from the New York Times notes that core inflation in the U.S. has fallen short of the Fed's price target for some time, but does not address why this is important or how this can affect the economy specifically. In a research paper discussing when low interest rates cause low inflation, the authors discuss the neo-Fisherian theory that predicts a low inflation rate is caused due to a central bank's low interest rate. This research paper discusses the implications of low inflation and what this correlates with in further detail, rather than just stating the problem and putting all of the focus and responsibility of low inflation on the government and the Federal Reserve to just change it. The editorial from the New York Times discusses that core inflation is low in the U.S., but fails to include evidence that supports why this is. In an online research paper, When Low Interest Rates Cause Low Inflation, the authors discuss that if the U.S. wants to stabilize inflation, higher equilibrium interest rates are necessary, and then this cannot occur strictly through monetary policy, which is what the New York Times editorial suggested. Including this information in their argument could have made the New York Times editorial stronger, because this gives us a reason for the call to action in the issue of inflation, rather than just stating there's a problem and expecting the government to handle it. Finally, the New York Times editorial article included attributions from the federal government that states low inflation is caused from idiosyncratic factors, or in other words, is attributed to individual factors. The individual factors mentioned here include things like blame on baby boomer generations that have caused higher paid people to leave the workforce and be replaced with younger, lower paid workers. Although this is a valid point, they do not go far enough in explaining its importance with inflation. To make their argument stronger, they could have included more concrete information that discusses further why the baby boomers could have an effect on inflation. An online article called "The Impact of Demographic Change in Stock Prices" discusses how stocks and inflation are connected, with younger workers entering the workforce. This can be related back to inflation and the baby boomers, and also provides accurate information that better connects baby boomers to current inflation rates. This article discusses how the budget deficit and low inflation have a negative effect on stock prices that affects inflation. This relates back to baby boomers because this budget deficit occurs in response to the large portion of retirees leaving the workforce to make room for them to come in and be the lower paid younger workforce. In conclusion, inflation is a public and national scale controversy that has been discussed on several platforms over the last decade. The article, Why is the Fed So Scared of Inflation?, discusses the issue head-on, but did not provide enough ample evidence and research of the topic in this article posted by the New York Times. Their topic and argument was relevant, but poorly executed in persuasive, accurate content, and could have been embellished upon by including any of the discussed information. Thank you.